Recording in progress.
So welcome everyone to our weekly call. As you just heard, we are recording the call as per normal. Hope you all had a fantastic weekend. So in terms of the agenda for our call today, as you're hopefully aware, the sort of main theme for the call, we're going to talk about indicators of compromise and their role in attack defense, or more accurately, Andy, one of the co-authors, will come on in a moment to do so. And this is a internet draft which recently sort of passed through the IESG, the Internet Engineering Strategy Group. So as far as I know, has now completed all the necessary steps to become a standard, so informational standard in this case. So we'll now go into the queue and ultimately come out the RFC sausage machine as a sort of new standard. So Andy will talk about that, and then we'll just touch on a few recent developments, of which there were sort of a couple of probably especially noteworthy ones over the last week or so, and signpost some forthcoming events, etc., as per normal. So hopefully that matches your expectations in what we're going to cover today. So without further ado, Andy, I don't know if you're planning to use slides in the end or not, but you should be able to screen share should you desire. We obviously heard that your sound is working, which is good. So I didn't notice any of your co-authors come on, although they may have crept on whilst I wasn't looking at the list of participants.
Right, so I think Ollie's here. I did say hi.
Perfect.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone.
Hi, good afternoon, Ollie. Well, that worked. So your sound's working too. So in which case, let me hand over to you to sort of talk us through the draft, and then no doubt that will lead to some questions from others on the call. So gents, over to you. Fire away.
Super. Thanks, Andrew, and thanks for the invite to speak about this on the call. So I do have some slides, so I'll attempt to share, but as I said, Zoom is not my forte, so we will see if this works.
If it doesn't, Andy, feel free to ping them over to me and I'll display them for you, but try it from your end first.
I don't know if that is working.
We're looking at just a blank screen at the moment.
It seems to be, if you can still hear me, it appears to be making Chrome not respond. So that's gone well. Okay, I'll just carry on talking. The slides aren't particularly important anyway. They were just sort of an aid. So what this draft is, so the authors on this are myself, Andrew S. from UK NCSC, Ollie is on the call, and James and Kirsty, who aren't here today. What this draft is just like an informational document on indicators of compromise. The idea being just say sort of what they are and how you can use them, and some sort of like suggestions on how you can use them most effectively. And the idea is to sort of spread that within the IETF a little. I'll have one more go at sharing slides just in case I can get it to work.
Or as I say, Andy, it says, yes, that's worked. Success.
Okay, super. Right, can you see a history slide?
Yep.
Marvelous. Yeah, so for those of you who were in the OPSEC meeting at IETF 115, this slide deck is roughly familiar, so I apologize, but I expect most of you weren't there. So yeah, just some history on where this document's come from. We've been working on it since March 2020, took it into the IETF Operational Security Group, we got dated it a bit since then, as you'd expect, and then it passed IESG review earlier this month. as Andrew mentioned. So yeah, our motivation was just to document it and capture the best practice, and we want to share it with protocol engineers in the IETF. Like, this is a very sort of important technique, and I think it's the case that sometimes protocol engineers in the IETF aren't as engaged with the cyber defense community as maybe they would like to be, and I think the other way around is certainly true as well. So what this is hoping to do is bridge the gap a little. But kind of an aim of this draft is to just prevent the technique being overlooked in protocol design. So that engineers, when you make choices about protocol design, they can sort of think about the impact on IOC availability. And we'd like to sort of just start the conversation in the IETF community at large about the impact of IOC availability on protocol design and like the internet. And then lastly, a sort of more holistic aim is to sort of bring some of the cyber defense expertise embodied certainly in Ollie, and bring it into the IETF and share it through this document. So this is the abstract, which I won't read to you, but to give you a sense of what we try and cover in the document, just to cover like basically the basics. So that's what I think we can hope to cover in a document that's only 20 odd pages or so. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, what is an IOC? So an indicator of compromise, or IOC, is an observable artifact relating to an attacker or their activities, such as their tactics, techniques, procedures, and associated tooling and infrastructure. So some examples here are on the slide, but these are all examples. When I say examples, these are IOCs when linked to malicious activity. So they sort of range across a range of protocols. So we've got IP addresses, domain names, TLS, SNI, and certificate information, but also down to hashes of particular malicious binaries, and then through to like the way an attacker structures their attack, beyond just sort of artifacts of this IP address is used or this domain name is used. I'll bring up the pyramid of pain in a bit and we can talk through that. So this is just an outline of the document. So we cover the fundamentals, we cover how to use them effectively, and then look at some of their limitations and how best to use them. So I mentioned the pyramid of pain. So this is the pyramid of pain. For those of you who have seen the document, I hope you enjoyed the ASCII arts, which have re-rendered here. So the idea here is to cover a range of IOCs and show the pain that it would cause an attacker to have to change them if you were to start detecting them and blocking them. So at the bottom, we've got hash values of malicious binaries. The idea here being that it's a very sort of specific indicator in that if you block that hash, you know it's going to be related to that malicious binary. But on the other hand, it's very easy for an attacker to sort of just change a character that doesn't change the program and change it again, and then your hash value is useless. So that's why it's very, very, very low pain for the attacker to change, but very specific. Then you move up through IP address and domain names, a bit harder for the attacker to change, but still reasonably specific. Though I know in the final review we got some comments about the specificity of domain names versus IP addresses, which I think is a really interesting discussion, and whether this has changed. So I should give credit that this pyramid of pain is not new in this document. So it's actually quite a few years old now, but it's still very good ideas. But I think it's possible that in the interim, domain names and IP addresses maybe have swapped, but I think it's very unclear. There's a discussion in the document. I think we can come to that later. And then you move up to the tools people are using and their tactics, techniques and procedures, the sort of thing where if you start detecting that, then they'll have to change the entirety of how they're doing their attack. So that's really like very hard for them to change. They have to change their entire methodology in a way that changing a character in a binary is basically no effort at all. So the IOC lifecycle we cover in the document. So this is how you would basically how you use an IOC throughout its life. So we start off with discovering it. So this will be in sort of tracking down an attack, you'd identify the IOC as something linked to that attack. The assessment is sort of finding out how it's used, getting some context around it. We then look at sharing it. There's no use just keeping it to yourself. So this could be within your organization. It could be through a sharing framework to share it with like thousands of other people and enterprises. But that's where it's going to have more effect, is when other people can use it. And as part of I'll come on to the next slide on why IOCs are so valuable, but their ease of sharing is a really big part of that. Deployments, this is putting it on a control point on your network to detect it. So actually getting out, and you need to think about where you're deploying different IOCs, whether that should be on endpoints, or on network defense devices, things like that. I'm not going to go into all details here. So detection, this is actually finding it. I think that's fairly self-explanatory. The reaction, so this is what you do when you detect it. So this will depend on a range of things. It could be the age of the IOC, which attack it's related to, what you as an enterprise or network are willing to do traffic on your network. And some of this could come down to the context I mentioned earlier on assessment. Like it could be that this is something related to a very old attack and you think it might be more likely to be a false positive, or it could be an indicator that there's a serious compromise that's occurred and you need to act fast. But again, context dependent. And then end of life. So I mentioned that there's a chance for false positive. You want to, when an IOC has done its job, like the attack it's related to is no longer valid, no longer happening, or the IOC is no longer associated with that attack, you want to stop detecting it to avoid those risks of false positives, or just avoid checking for irrelevant things. So using IOCs effectively. So this is sort of some of the benefits we outline in the document of why IOCs are so valuable. So the top one is about defense in depth. Because they cover all the layers of that pyramid, you can catch attacks at various places and deploy them in various places. Just gives you more breadth. So if you miss something, you miss the binary, you might still catch it when it talks to its command and control server by the IP address, for example. Used with limited resources, like at a basic level, all you could be doing is just deploying a match for an IP address at something sat on the edge of your network, which is not no effort, but it's relatively easy to do compared to having a whole blue team looking out for your network or deploying machine learning or something like that. It's actually relatively simple compared to a lot of other techniques, and that's a big benefit of them. Has a multiplier effect within an organization. Basically, it's like they're easy to deploy at various points on your network. They're easy to share quickly. So you don't just have to deploy it in one, can't just deploy it in one place, you can deploy it all over your network, could be globally. It's very quick to scale right across your network and all the places you're defending. Sharing between organizations, so sort of a similar idea, but as I mentioned earlier that sharing is kind of what's the point of IOCs. A lot of them you can represent as like in a simple textual form. So like this could just be a hash value or an IP address. So there are lots of great frameworks for sharing them, but on the other hand, it could be as simple as sending an email with a list of IP addresses in it. So again, it's sort of accessible to people at various levels of expertise and time. Speaking of time, providing time savings, again, like easy to deploy, are a lot simpler than having to diagnose stuff yourself every time. You can just automate rollout of IOCs, possibly that are shared via a threat feed, and protect your network very quickly and keep it up to date very easily, rather than doing something that will be more time consuming and more heavyweight, or finding attacks yourself necessarily. Discovering historic attacks, because these are simple identifiers, it's easy to look back in logs and find them after the fact. If you've been compromised in the past but didn't realize, you can maybe look back through logs once IOCs are published by someone who's done some research into a particular attacker. Always useful to know and work out, okay, do I need to go back and look at my network and find something? And the last one, attributed to specific threats. So I mentioned that IOCs are normally provided with context about sort of what attacker they relate to, how they're used. So this is sort of the almost like basic consequence of that. You can tie down, okay, I've seen this IP address, or I've seen this malicious binary, I know that's linked to this attacker, and you can tie it to the rest of their activity globally if you're sharing on that level. So that's like a quick run through some of the benefits. As I said, it's only a short presentation. I think the discussion is the more interesting bit here. So that's just a quick run through the document for those who haven't read it. I'll also just take an opportunity to say that the process of writing this document has been really good, and they've got a lot of help from lots of people in the IETF, some of whom are on this call. So thank you very much for that. So all of us are first-time authors, so it's been a new thing to go through, but it's been really valuable, and I'm really glad that we got here. So I'll get to questions, but I'll see if Ollie has anything to add first, and I'll stop sharing.
No, Andy, I think you've done a very good job at summarising it, and so very happy to support on the discussion.
Super, thanks, Ollie.
Fantastic. Right. Well, thank you for the quick run through of some of the key highlights, Andy, and for everybody else, if you hadn't picked it up already, I've put a link to the URL for the document in the chat, so you can sort of read that at your leisure. If anyone's got any questions, please raise your virtual hand so that I can sort of bring into the discussion, or if you're somewhere where you can't easily talk, by all means pop a question into the chat and I will read it out. And maybe to give you a chance to think of any questions, I'll maybe kick off with one. So given that I have a particular interest in protocol designs, so I suppose a fairly generic question, Andy and or Ollie. Any thoughts on the implications for in the cases of compromise as increasingly encryption is introduced into internet protocols? And given the focus of this call has primarily been around things like DNS, then clearly I guess something about things like DNS over HTTPS, for example, or indeed newer proposed protocols like encrypted client hello. So any thoughts on the implications for operational security as encryption is brought into those protocols?
Andy, do you want to say that?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so sure, it's making the job of cyber defenders a lot more challenging. So we have often relied on the ability to see some of those things at the network level for all of the reasons that we've outlined in terms of the document. So with the pervasive arrival of encryption, it's created scalability challenges, attribution challenges, and various other operational challenges for cyber defenders more broadly. So that's pushed us increasingly having to go to prior to where data is encrypted on the endpoint, which then has its own set of unique challenges around embedded systems and those types of things where that access may not be possible. So the long and short of it is, you know, there's a line there that probably needs to be walked, and that's in part of the genesis for the document to have that discussion, because I think in the enterprise setting, this is really, really challenging, and increasingly so when things like DO and other things are deployed.
Okay, thanks, Ollie. That's helpful. And do you have any sense of whether CISOs in general understand that? Yeah, is this on their radar currently, do you believe?
I think for CISOs and you know, but that's good. CISOs are in the top 2%, right, of organizations, and I think they do understand it and know how to engineer or work around it. I think where we see bigger impact often is in the smaller organizations who are relying on carrier or other third parties doing detection and remediation on their behalf, and that may be outside the edge of their network, or in fact in the modern world they increasingly don't have a network, right? You know, it's a set of mashed kind of software as a service interactions from point to point. And so I think, yeah, maturity says yes, but then it tails off really quickly, and then people don't know what they don't know. And so they're at the moment fighting with basic asset identification, patch management, let alone what the midterm pain point that pervasive encryption is going to give them.
Yeah, Fair enough. Thank you. Do other people on the call have questions? As I say, just yeah, Peter, you literally raised your hand. That's always makes it easy.
Yeah. Just to say thanks. This is a great document, and I spent a lot of time looking at IOCs, especially in the DNS world, and thinking about it. I haven't read the document yet, so but it was a great presentation. I'd like to read through it more carefully before, commenting on it. But yeah, it's great to see. That's my main thing. So thanks.
Thank you, Peter. And obviously, if you do have any questions or any comments kind of after you have gone through it, we would love to hear them, because I think, we're trying to work out where the solutions are and where the opportunities are in protocol design, which give everyone what they need and want, depending on what their objectives are.
I think the first thing that comes to mind, and again, that's why I said I haven't read it yet, because I don't know how well it's been addressed in the document, is the different sort of levels of IOCs, where there's clearly, C2 domains are they're a threat or not, but sometimes there's IOCs which can be like a CDN, for example, might be hosting a piece of malware, and you don't know whether that is on its own, the domain name is enough for it to be considered an IOC or not. So the sort of, like, some people might want to block the whole thing, but other people might not want to. Is an access to it on its own going to be evidence of a compromise, or is a series of DNS requests going to be the kind of the IOC together that you're looking for?
Yeah, it's a fair challenge, and I think it's very much dependent on the threat actor. In some cases we have clusters of activity which do center around IP addresses or DNS domain names, and they're arguably the less sophisticated end, but there's still some pretty punchy ones that still operate in that manner. And yes, and we try to articulate that in part in the pyramid of pain, where sometimes actually the further you go up, it's not one thing, it is a collection of various kind of weaker signals that, when combined, allow that detection activity to occur. But yeah, CDN's an interesting one, because domain fronting is one of those great challenges, right? Where people can terminate the TLS connection, and then in the host header start to then request arbitrary websites which are served by the CDN, and we see that a lot by some sophisticated threat actors to mask where they're actually routing through to.
The other thing, I just, sorry to keep going, but I noticed is that it's really great that you addressed that end of life thing, because expiries and that kind of aspect of IOCs is tricky to deal with, and also false positives, because I've created a list of some threat intelligence feed that has, for example, with the Kaseya attack, I think it was is it 2 years ago now? it was ages ago. Someone extracted a list of C2 servers from the config file of the piece of ransomware that was used. Turns out that perhaps it was a misdirect, or it wasn't valid. A bunch of people contacted me to say that they'd been checked and they were fine, but I don't think it was ever fully cleared up whether it was a valid list of C2 servers or not, and it was hard to tell. So yeah, false positives is a tricky one as well. But in general, thank you.
No, just on your expiry point, yes, it's something we're very mindful of. We do see, obviously there are people that go and register their own infrastructure by their own domain names, and then there are those that compromise others and use them almost as ephemeral pieces of infrastructure for a period of time. And after they get cleaned up, the C2 and the ISCs need to be expired, and that's going to be an ongoing challenge for sure.
Yeah, thanks.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Peter. I'll just going back to your previous point about how to know what to do if you have like a CDN domain name in there. Like, that's why I think the context is so important. Different people can make different decisions. If the network's really cautious, then they might want to block it, but other people might make different decisions. So that's something we try to bring out in the document as well, that it helps people to make their own decisions if they want to, if you provide enough context.
Great, thanks for additional sort of point, Andy. Anyone else got questions for Ollie and Andy, perhaps on things like the implications for protocols, I guess, in particular, specifically the DNS, or anything else in that area. As I said earlier, either unmute, or if it's easier, put a question in the chat, and I will happily read it out on your behalf as appropriate. And maybe
So I suppose while we wait for questions, I can say on DNS, we talk about in the document NCSC's protective DNS service, which we provide to public sector organisations in the UK. So as an example of where you'd use those IOCs or domain names, we can quickly roll that out to like the whole UK public sector that has signed up to PDNS. Sort of an example of how powerful an IOC can be there when it's rolled out in the right way and when it's shared in the right way. So it might be of interest to sort of from the DNS angle. That's something we talk about a little bit more in the document, and also a nice plug for how NCSC is protecting the UK.
Yeah, and more broadly, actually, interestingly, Europe announced last week that they were going to, they have rolled out a kind of a transnational resolver for all of Europe, providing a similar protected DNS service to European citizens, and naturally that has certain prerequisites.
Yeah, but I think both good points, and we'll come back to that European resolver momentarily as it happens. So that'll be a useful link for our sort of discussion in a second or two. Just while people are thinking, any observations from the sort of the discussion as this sort of cleared the IESG sort of hurdle? Whether there are any sort of particular points of debate amongst the IESG members that stood out for you as authors?
I don't think there was anything particularly like pointy about the document. I think because the document's informational, there wasn't going to be anything too, there's not a protocol design issue to get into there. So I see what's the most difficult discuss to resolve. We only had one discuss, which is from Eric Finke, and luckily it was very easy to resolve. It was just some data on IPv6. So the one discuss we had was very easy to resolve, thankfully. In terms of the comments, I think the one that gave us the most food for thought was something I touched on the discussion about the relative specificity of IP addresses and domain names, and how when the period of pain originally came out, I think it was harder to get a domain name registered than it probably is now. But sort of things have moved in both directions. So IPv4 addresses are scarcer, which on one hand could mean it's harder to change, but on the other hand means that there are multiple servers behind any given IP address, which makes them less specific. There's also domain generation algorithms, which again make domain names easier to change for attackers, but attackers will probably want domain names that are related to some benign service they're trying to, or they may want benign service they're trying to impersonate, and they're quite hard to get. So that was, I think, the most interesting discussion we had as authors behind the scenes. I see there's a hand up though.
Yes, and thank you. Well, two things. So thank you, Michael, for phrasing my question much more eloquently than I. That's exactly what I was driving at. So I'll remember that for the next time. But you obviously have now got a further question. So do come in.
Yeah, I was watching the MapRG research group yesterday, the recording, and there was a very interesting presentation about IPv6 scanners out there. I just posted the slide link there. It's also in the thing. Probably be better to watch the video. And so IP addresses. That's, I think, a really, I don't know what Eric Finke asked about, but this was a really kind of an interesting discussion here about, should you conclude you're being attacked from some v6/64 because you saw a couple thousand addresses from it, and it's one guy with the whole /64, or is in fact this is the Starbucks cafe and or the IETF meeting, and you in fact would be doing a great disservice if you thought that was an indicator of compromise, because there was a lot of traffic from 1/64. And I don't think we have a good answer to this yet, but I think this is something that I think this kind of work needs to start. I think there needs to be some exchange of information across observers. And I know we have some protocols that maybe we could talk about, and I think Kathleen, if she's here, knows a lot about that, you know, might help us with that. But as far as I know, no one's deploying it, and no one's figured out how to exchange that information in a privacy preserving way that still is useful. So I don't know where that goes. Maybe there's some comments from the authors.
I'll step in and say that I think that particular topic is not one I've given thought to particularly. I've been more focused on getting the document finished and addressing all the comments. But I think that is a really interesting point. I think on your first point about how do we know that's Starbucks versus how do we know that's a malicious actor, I'd hope that's something that the initial discoverer of the IOC would do as some due diligence before blindly sharing it with the world as block all these, please. But that's not necessarily that easy to track down. I think these are
but
challenges.
The opposite information, I'm pretty sure this is Starbucks, so be much more skeptical. That's actually a really useful, indicator of non-compromise, maybe that we want to share, right? And maybe Starbucks actually wants to start telling us where their IP addresses are, because they don't want their coffee shops blacklisted or deny listed, whatever the word is today.
Yeah, so I think that's wonderful until their infrastructure gets compromised, and then it's used as a stepping stone by threat actors. And again, we have seen various instances where that happens at scale, and indeed, there are certain CDNs where you can just procure services free or very low cost. And again, threat actors are smart to that and will do so to mask their actual originating servers, which presents some challenges for us all.
I guess that discussion illustrates why this isn't easy, which is helpful. Yeah, great question. Thanks, Michael. Does anyone else have any questions or comments for Andy and Ollie? Give you a chance to unmute if you do. I'm not seeing any typing at the moment, and I'm not seeing any hands raised. So I'm guessing most people will, if they haven't done so already, will want to sort of read the document, which, although it's not yet issued, is at least sort of cleared, as I mentioned at the outset, the IESG sort of hurdle. So we'll just now go through the RFC editor before coming out the sausage machine in however many months the backlog currently is. So in due course, we'll see this sort of published, probably with a few tweaks here or there, but as the sort of finished RFC, which would be fantastic to see, as it's a very important area. So let's sort of move on there. So thank you, Andy and Ollie, for taking the time to come on, and more importantly, to write the document itself and navigate the IETF processes, which are never the simplest. So sort of good work, and yeah, I think it will lead to some interesting discussions in other fora as a consequence, not least of which some of the work that some of us are involved with at the moment, looking at the sort of deployment considerations for ECH, for example, where this is the document's already been referenced as an important and useful sort of reference source. So thank you for your hard work. You're welcome to stay on the call, of course. We'll move on to other topics, and please read the draft, everyone, if you haven't already. It's well worth it. Right, so let me just reshare my screen and remind everyone where we are. So I said we'd just pick up on a few recent developments, which have been certainly a number of particular interest over the last week. These, as always, are in the weekly headlines email that you would have got earlier today, but I'll just sort of highlight the ones on this page in particular. So in the order that they're on the screen, there's an interesting consultation that's been kicked off by the I'll read this out in full. The United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, who has initiated a consultation on the relationship between human rights and technical standard setting processes for new and emerging digital technologies. This caught my eye because I think it's the first time I've seen the topic being overtly addressed so within the wider civil society sphere, and I think it's really good that it is. If you click on the link as shown on the slide, it will take you through to the some more detail. They're holding a roundtable this Wednesday, in person in Geneva or online, but also taking written inputs separately to the in-person discussion. So you can either sort of participate live or do it asynchronously. They pose a number of questions. I haven't put one on the slide, but if you click through, you'll see what they are to help frame the discussion. I thought they were quite thoughtful questions personally, and those of us that have an interest in this intersection between policy and technical standards, it'd be well worth your time, if you haven't done so already, reading this and considering your submissions to the consultation. So that's the first one, and coincidentally, but separately, UNESCO have just published some guidelines for content regulation, and again are seeking further written inputs to help inform their thinking, perhaps with some further refinements to their guidelines. So again, there's a link there that you can use which will take you through to the detail. So again, those of you looking at sort of intersection of policy and technical matters, worth your time looking at that one. Third topic of interest to me this week, there's a new European public resolver was launched back end of last week, DNSO.eu, which is now live. Public resolver, amongst others, is sort of launched by the co-founders of NextDNS. Claims, and I've not tested this, I hasten to add, but claims to have support for .do, DOQ, DNS over HTTP3, and also support already for DDR. As I say, I've not sort of checked the specifics on all of those, whether they're all live yet. But that's certainly referenced on the website. This is not the DNS4 EU resolver. It's DNS 0 for .eu rather than for EU. But many of the characteristics have a lot of similarities with what's planned for DNS4 EU. So there's, my humble opinion, there's a lot of overlap between the two. So that's what you might want to take a look at. And then the other one I've highlighted on this slide is just an update on the continuing sort of court case involving Sony Music and Quad9 in the sort of German regional courts, I think it is. And this is whether the resolver operators should be compelled to block access to content, in this case copyright infringing content specifically. So John, I don't think John Todd's not on the call this week, but I put a couple of links there. One to the Media, the second one, to the Quad 9 site. And between them, you should get a good overview as to the current situation on the court action, if that's of interest to you. Other things, I'm not going to go through these, but these are included in the weekly highlights. Obviously, I'm sort of referenced the indicators of compromise document and a couple of other stories, so that those are there for your interest should you wish to sort of click through and follow up on the detail of those. And then there were a few other things. One is internet fragmentation, a presentation by Andrew Sullivan of the Internet Society. So that it looks likely that internet fragmentation will be one of the main topics for Eurodig later on this year. So on the policy side, that is probably worth a look, as I think Andrew's presentation, or something very similar to it, will likely feature within Eurodig for those of you thinking of participating there. And a few other studies and other reports, such as a new initiative within the EU to counter disinformation. But I'll leave you to, again, look at those at your leisure if you so desire. In terms of forthcoming events, as you're hopefully aware, since we discussed it last week, NANOG is live pretty much now in Atlanta. Looking at the time difference, it should be up and running into the second or third presentation by now of the first sort of main day, with OARC 40 taking place on Thursday, Friday of this week in the same venue. And we're surprisingly close now to ITF 116 in Yokohama. And when I looked earlier today, I think there are just over 700 people registered to participate live, and a couple of hundred, maybe 250 already registered to take part remotely. So the numbers are building up quite nicely for that, and then various other events later on in the year. In terms of calls for paper and proposals, workshop proposals, they were one new addition to what I've put on previously. Eurodig 23, they've done a first cut of some of the proposals for topics. So there's a draft program that's already taken shape, and they're going to hold calls on the 2nd and 3rd of March to just take input on those proposals. So if you want, you've got an opportunity to take a look at the sort of draft program and then sort of share your views on during those calls, should you wish. And as I mentioned, one of the topics, or one of the sessions rather, certainly was on internet fragmentation, and there are a few others which I can't remember off the top of my head. So that's that. Last main thing from me, we got a few calls lined up over the next number of weeks, as you can see. So next Monday we'll sort of just talk through some of the highlights from the presentations, mainly from OARC 40, but potentially as well a couple from NANOG, and so on. One of the new additions that I've added on the 6th of March, the DNS Research Federation team, so that's Emily Taylor, Lucian Taylor, and others, will be coming on the call to demonstrate their DAP Live system, which Lucian, I think, referenced when he and Emily last sort of joined us last September, October time. So the system was just being developed at that point. It's now operational, so the team will come on to demonstrate it, and obviously take questions and so on. Various other things lined up as well. Okay, so I think that's pretty much it from me. So let me stop sharing and see if there's anything from others. And sorry, Peter, I don't know if you just raise your hand, if you had it raised for a few minutes, but do you want to unmute? And
yeah, a couple of small things. So last week, last year, DNS Filter and Web Shrinker, which is one of our products, we released a top domains list, and it's basically a ranked list of domains that we've seen at DNS Filter that's been filtered and for privacy and ranked by the number of requests that we're getting. And we have a kind of methodology where each of our customer organizations gets one vote. And it was initially published as a kind of thing under the Web Shrinker brand and was behind a gated email gateway, which I didn't particularly like. And I spent a little while trying to convince people internally to release it more usefully for researchers, which I was able to do. I'm very happy about doing that. So last week, it was published as under the Creative Commons Share Alike license. And it's an open repository on GitHub, which I put in the chat. And yeah, it's got a top 250,000 and then the full list, which is about 400,000 or so, plus or minus, domains. It's once a month. There's a list of a methodology on the page there, and there's also some lists to the other top lists out there. So if anybody finds this useful, hopefully it's more accessible to researchers and, for anything you like. We have quite a, there's lots of different top domains lists out there. And ours is good if you want to see from the kind of commercial side. It's a US focused audience and, just another one for people to consider. The second thing, quickly, sorry, I talk too much in your meetings, Andrew, was a volunteer actually for in a couple of weeks, maybe like on March the 13th, I could do a presentation for the first, which is the Forum of Incident Responders and Security Teams. We have finally made our document ready for publication after a couple of years of work from tons of different people. And this is a matrix of DNS abuse techniques. And this is a way of listing all the different kinds of DNS abuse that we could think of and all the different stakeholders that might be able to help with detecting it, preventing it, and mitigating it. There's additional work we need to do, like how do you know which kind of DNS abuse you're experiencing? And it is aimed to be helpful at incident responders and security teams. Yeah, it's been a ton of work, and there's a whole bunch of people involved in it, and it will be great to tell people in more detail about it. But I'll be spamming Twitter and everything with that soon. So.
Well, in which case, since currently I've got a slot available on the 13th, Peter, so very happy to have you do that, if, and others that are involved if appropriate.
Yeah, I'll see if anybody else wants to come on and help me do the presentation. But I don't know if John Todd's on today. He was the co-chair until very recently of the DNS Abuse SIG, and I'm the co-chair, and it's been such a long time to get to this point, and we're having to release it. It's quite exciting. So I'd love to tell people more about it. Thanks. Yeah.
Well, congratulations. After 2 years, I think that's certainly noteworthy, isn't it? That's a lot of work. And also, on your list, as I recall, that was, go back to the earlier item, that was something that you announced, I think, just after the demise of the Alexa Millions.
That was the idea. Was we thought, since the Alexa top domains list is used by so many people, we thought we would try and put our own together. But I personally was never really for the approach of making it gated. But hey, we've got my way in the end. That's all I can say. Now it's a proper Creative Commons list, and which just requires attribution, can be used for anything you like, really.
But on the positive side, that it was gated whilst the wrinkles were ironed out, and now it's
exactly
perfectly. You can unveil it. Yeah, makes sense. Brilliant. Thank you for those, Peter, and I'll add that to the list. Send me a title or something, and I'll add that to the list.
Yeah, will do. Thank you.
Fantastic. All right, well, that's really good. Anyone else with any other topics that you want to raise in the last handful of minutes before we run out of time on the call, give you a moment to jump in should you wish, or pop something in the chat if that's easier. Not currently seeing any evidence of anyone typing as far as I can tell. I think the display indicates if someone's actually starting to type, so I don't think that is the case. No hands raised. Right, in which case I think we're done then. So hopefully that was useful to you all. Thank you in particular, Andy and Ollie, for taking us through some of the key points in the indicators of compromise paper, and so congratulations again for getting that through the IETF process, which is not quite rightly not an easy task to do. There are some good quality gates on there. Yeah, I think we're done. So have a fantastic week, everyone. And as always, look forward to catching you again same time next week, and we'll talk about some of the highlights from what I think is shaping up to be a very interesting OARC event this week, with some very interesting topics. So we'll pick up on some of those this time next week, and sort of take you through some of the highlights. So have a great week, everyone, and speak to you again very soon. Bye all.